Good afternoon. My name is Iman Ali. I am a student worker at the University Chaplaincy here at Tufts. I use the she series pronouns. And today I have the pleasure of interviewing our University Chaplaincy Assistant Director and Humanist Chaplain, Walker Bristol. Walker, I hope you're doing well today. Could you please begin by introducing yourself with your name and pronouns?
Definitely. Thank you, Iman. My name is Walker, and as Iman shared, I'm the Assistant Director and Humanist Chaplain here at Tufts for the Tufts University Chaplaincy. And here at Tufts, I use the pronouns they, them, and theirs.
All right, so let's get started with our series of questions. I would love to hear how you came to be a chaplain at Tufts. What did that journey look like for you?
Absolutely. So let's see. So I was very lucky. I came here as a student. I was an undergraduate student here, and I graduated in 2014. And during the time that I was here as a student, we didn't have a humanist chaplain at the time. The chaplaincy was a bit smaller, it was under different leadership, but there was a lot of interest among the students, including myself, in what it would be like for someone on the chaplaincy staff to be dedicated to working with non-religious student community members, students, staff, to be creating programs to that end, to be sort of advocating for a chaplaincy that is really inclusive of everyone, because still today about 1/3 of our students in one way or another would say they're not religious, and yet we really believe that we can still offer something to all of them. And so as I was graduating from college, I went to divinity school right afterwards, not certain about what I wanted to do, but knowing that I wanted to I really love the idea of being alongside people and their stories and hearing their stories and exploring their stories. And shortly after I started divinity school, I was able to do really kind of an internship level position here as one of the chaplains, as the first humanist. We call it the humanist in residence. It's kind of the advisor level position that we have now to really get this program off the ground. And the role that I've been in for the last 7 years or so has changed a bit in that time. And I've started to do even more and more kind of what we call pastoral and spiritual care with students and working alongside students. And I've gotten to meet a lot of really terrific students and staff in doing this. But I think really I've just always been interested in both storytelling and like coming to understand ourselves as a part of a bigger story. And that idea of story is really important to me. And being a chaplain here, and I'm also a chaplain at a hospital downtown, is really just it feels like I'm just really fundamentally and in a really raw way sort of alongside people and within people's stories in a way that is really meaningful to me. So that's a little bit about how I came to it.
That was so beautifully put, and I definitely learned a lot from that too. So the next question that I have is, what is one ritual, practice, or idea that's been on your mind lately? However you interpret lately, be it the pandemic or also non-pandemic specific, just specific to this year.
Okay. I'm curious what you would say about this, Iman, so I might ask you the same question in a second. But I have become the idea of silence has always been really important to me. And I used to go to a Quaker meeting. I have Quaker history in my family. I used to go to a Quaker meeting in times when we were able to be in person. I've gone a few times when we've been doing the virtual meeting. And if you don't know, a Quaker meeting means it's sort of a time for worship. It's a time to meet where that is typically completely in silence until someone gets up and speaks out of the silence. And I find a lot of comfort in that. I find a lot of connection in that, even though I approach it in kind of a non-religious way. It still is a lot of spiritual meaning to me. And especially, honestly, working in a hospital through the pandemic and being just surrounded by silence in many, many cases, whether it's because a patient isn't able to speak and I'm kind of alongside them through that, or it's sort of just there are fewer people around, there's less busyness in the same way for the sake of social distancing. I just feel like silence has taken on a new meaning, and I've kind of revisited my experience of that silence to remind myself why it's important to me and not to just associate it with being distant, being apart, right? And it's reminded that the silence is the space in which we connect, I think. And so I've just sort of tried to like proactively grab hold of that silence more and more in my life. I sort of try to have silent time before I eat, not necessarily prayer time, it's just sort of a silent moment of gratitude. I try to just take silence in my day and through my day, whether it's external silence, like I'm not listening to music, I'm not doing anything, I'm not talking, or sort of internal silence, just like how not really empty, but how sort of open can I make myself and just see what comes up, and really try to be in touch with that. So in a few different ways, I think silence has been sort of the ritual practice that I felt most connected to in the last year. But Iman, I wonder, is there a ritual or a practice or something you felt connected to in the last year?
Yeah, I really loved what you had to say about silence. I think it's making me think about how I frame a lot of my interactions in day-to-day sort of actions, because you're right. Especially in our busy world where everyone's trying to find a way to like block out the noise, but not necessarily be in silence. Like you're listening to music or you're listening to a podcast. It can be hard to like get yourself to just sit in the silence, be uncomfortable if that feels uncomfortable, and kind of like work through those feelings. For me, I think that this year, something that I've leaned into a lot is what in Arabic we'd call dua, which essentially translates to supplication. So it's a form of prayer to God in our tradition. And specifically for me, I've really found it powerful and moving to engage in that in prostration. So part of the prayer ritual that we have in Islam, one of the movements is you're literally like in prostration to God. And I think that positioning, like it's said to be like sort of like a very like moment of spiritual intimacy. And so for me, I've used that to kind of just like open up about everything that I'm sort of going through and have that like one-on-one connection with God. And I think for me, that definitely has helped me become more grounded in my faith and also work through a lot of the different issues, complexities, stressors that have come up, in particularly this year. And it's something that I want to continue implementing in my life for sure.
Gotcha. And I would just say that, and I'm sure there is important differences between them, but the phrase spiritual intimacy sounds very familiar to me in terms of that. We sometimes, in the Quaker terminology, you might say waiting. It's like waiting for that revelation or just sort of making yourself open to it. I think it is a very intimate thing, I think, to be silent with that sense of waiting. And even again, even though I don't really think of it as waiting for revelation from God, but revelation from, all sorts of different sources of inspiration, sources of things greater than myself. It does feel quite intimate. In some ways, sometimes that intimacy can be kind of what's uncomfortable about it, I think. And you're right. I think sometimes it takes intent to kind of push through that and notice and be really open to it. So thank you for sharing that, Iman.
For sure. So the next question that I have is kind of open-ended. So it's kind of however you interpret it, feel free to talk about it. And that is, what's something that you believe?
What is something I believe? What's funny is I knew this question was coming and I still need a second to think about it. So let me take an uncomfortable silent moment to think about it. I think that I really believe, and the reason I'm drawn to this particular belief is because I think it sometimes is challenging for myself. Like it's hard to believe it. But I really, really do believe that everybody is worthy of love and dignity. And not so much in a way that we should all get along in the same way, or we should all, every behavior, every kind of thing is acceptable in the same way. But I think in particular, the times when I'm not inclined to believe that, when I'm trying to support someone who's either behavior or their beliefs or a lot about them I really do not agree with, in towards creating the kind of world that I want to believe in, that I really kind of believe is possible. I also believe that change within ourselves requires that we believe that for ourselves. And I do think that a lot of harm and conflict in our world comes from the absence of that belief within oneself, even if that's not what someone might say. Like, I think often when I meet people in crisis, part of that crisis is the feeling of loneliness when you don't really even feel in a sense of love or dignity or connection with yourself. And you don't necessarily feel like you have that ground to stand on. You don't feel grounded. You feel like you're always falling. And that can lead to really harmful stuff that people are still responsible for. It's not that they're not responsible, but I think a part of responsibility, a part of accountability, a part of what some people might think of as processes for like restorative justice even, are rooted in this belief that really everyone is deserving of love and dignity, but love and dignity can be a very, very challenging thing also. Something that really does hold us accountable. And in order to really radically show that for everyone, it can require very, very difficult things, very difficult conversations, very difficult processes that we have not yet figured out, right? So that's something that is a belief I have, and it's a belief I'm often trying to remind myself of and sort of find that. And again, someone might use the word faith in it, like to really find that, to hold to it, and that I have doubts about and that I struggle with. Because I think it's important in order to, both in my role here and in my role as a chaplain, but also just as a person in the world with the people, to be able to move towards the kind of world that I believe we can live in together. As a very open-ended question.
Powerfully put. I feel like it's almost like a call to action for our society to take up. I love that. So the next question I have is, which I know you are very keen of and you know a lot about, is how do you describe pastoral care? And I have a couple of sub-questions that if you would like, I can bring up now if it's helpful as you answer it. And or would you like to just tackle the larger question first?
Why don't I'll say a few things about what I believe about pastoral care, and then maybe we can, if it's seeing whether I address those pieces or not. So so pastoral care, it's a phrase that I use a lot and that we in the chaplaincy have come to use, well, we've used for a long time and we've come to use more and more, even though I completely recognize, and I think very truthfully, it really isn't a very familiar phrase to a lot of people, especially young people in the United States or young people on a college campus today. But to me, pastoral care is, I mean, specifically, it is the kind of care and counseling and support that really underlies really all the work that a chaplain does, that someone in a role like mine does, but especially in those one-on-one relationships, or those relationships where there's a small group and we have some sort of shared kind of theme or goal about coming to understand something about ourselves or about the world or about something greater than ourselves. I think many of us on the chaplain staff, I don't want to speak for all my colleagues, but I think what seems to be true, and talking about this a lot, especially in the last year, is that we really think of that in all aspects of what we do. Like that really does inform that kind of, like, we are here to accompany people. We are here to be alongside them on, everyone has their own journey, their own spiritual journey, their own philosophical journey. We are really here to be alongside everyone in that journey. And that can look quite differently for different people. And yet that is the fundamental piece of what we do. And yet also, I think it's important that, I mean, I think when we talk about pastoral care, especially with our community here, there's often a thought of, okay, it's sort of like the kind of counseling that I might find from another resource on campus, but it's specifically from a chaplain, which I think is often what we mean sometimes when we say it or when we talk about it externally outside of our office. And so in that sense, very often what pastoral care looks like, at least for me especially, is here at Tufts, is talking about those many challenges that we face in life that aren't necessarily like clinical problems. I mean, people have clinical, mental, and emotional and spiritual health needs, and there are clinical resources on campus for that. And like clinical, like CMHS is a clinical resource, counseling mental health services is a clinical resource. There are also lots of challenges of life that are quite expected or maybe unexpected, but they aren't necessarily a clinical issue, or they're not the fundamental thing. Like, for example, I think a good example of this is grief and loss. I mean, we all experience loss, and we've all experienced a lot of loss in the last year. And loss is a very challenging thing to undergo. And it's also, those challenges of loss they aren't necessarily clinical problems. They aren't necessarily things about your mental health. They certainly can, things about our mental health can emerge from that. And that gives, and then CMHS and research that are really valuable for that kind of work. And also that is a natural, there's also parts of that that are about how we make meaning and understand, and make meaning and come to understand a loss that we've experienced, a loss in our lives, the many types of losses we've experienced. So very often if somebody experiences loss, they might come to talk to a chaplain to just sort of, I mean, we're trained to think about the stages of grief or the cycles of grief, so think of it as a cycle of grief, to validate the pieces of that that are normal, and also to observe the pieces that are going to be unique about any kind of loss we experience. And then as we start to, as you go through that natural cycle, to start to understand, well, what does this loss mean for me? What does it mean for my life? What does it mean for the way my life is different now that I've experienced this loss? And how does that either change how you are in relationship to community? How does it change your relationship to God or to something greater than yourself, or to your practice? And are there tools within any of our religions and spiritualities that can help us to do that, that can help us to understand it differently. Is there a story? Is there a prayer? Is there a particular practice that can help us on that journey of making meaning of it? And that's really what we do with pastoral care. That's what I do with pastoral care. Now, at the hospital where I work in a multi-faith capacity. So I do pastoral care with people, many of whom are quite religious, or maybe more traditionally religious, very different population. Here at Tufts, I'm the Humanist chaplain, and I work predominantly with people who aren't religious or maybe grew up religious and are asking a lot of questions about it. I think a lot of people come to meet me and see me, especially when they're thinking about questions about identity in many forms. So it could be about your own spiritual identity, it could be about your gender identity, or even your racial or ethnic identity, or your cultural identity, your relationship to your culture. And that is another, that is a very natural, in fact, almost expected kind of part of being a part of a community like ours. And also it can be valuable to have someone to ask certain questions with you, to give you space to explore that, I think is what I try to do. And to also, to be both in that relationship, is kind of a counseling relationship, and also in community with people. I am in community with everyone here at Tufts. I'm a part of this community. I care about this community also. We are in community in a general sense in our world, but I think there is something really unique about, you might know me in a role as a part of like the Humanist community or something, or another community on campus. You might know me through my work at the care office and the sexual misconduct office. And you might also know me as someone who you seek out for that kind of support. And I think seeing how things grow and knowing more about one another in relationship through those different ways we are in community with one another, I think is often a really characteristic thing about what pastoral care looks like for chaplaincies, because chaplaincies are a part of institutions that are secular. They're not there, and chaplains are a part of those communities in lots of different ways, which for other like clinical resources may not always be the case. And so, so it's quite a bit about a bit of a jumble about pastoral care and how I offer it. I wondered if any of those follow-up questions, or if you have any questions, Iman, that it would be helpful for me to talk more about.
I think you did a great job of covering all the bases. And I liked the example that you used about like grief and loss, in terms of sort of shedding light on like, so what does someone actually go to a chaplain to do? And like, what are you sort of trained to support and cater to? And so I think that was like a really nice example for our viewers and community members who will see this for sure. So would love to hear about your idea of where would you like to see the Tufts University Chaplaincy go from where it is now?
We're growing in a lot of really exciting ways, and a lot of those are, I'm thrilled with the way that this, I've been a part of the Tufts community for more than 10 years and more than 11 years now. I've seen the chaplaincy grow and change in lots of different ways on campus from how I perceived it when I first came to campus. Much of that change has been just how accessible it is, how integrated it is across campus, how I don't think it's, not that there's anything necessarily wrong, but I think that they're just by nature of both pastoral care and chaplaincy in general, it has a very Christian origin, in some ways a very white Christian origin in the United States. And with that history, it can be easy for that to be either the perception that people have of an office like ours, or the assumptions made, like even working in office, of like what our goals are. And I think that we've really outgrown that. We've really transcended that in a way that's really actually unique, I think, for a lot of our peer institutions here at Tufts, or excuse me, in the United States. And so there are lots of ways in which I am just already excited that we are growing with the people we've hired in the last year, as Mira and Preeta and Harsha, with the ways we build new relationships on campus, the ways we've responded to the pandemic. I think one place, thinking specifically about pastoral care, so I briefly was a staff member of, and I'm still on the scheduler for, and I meet a lot of people through the care office as the Center for Awareness, Resources, and Education, and we offer resources and support to people. Primarily my role there is to offer resources and support people who are involved in Title IX investigations, so that's sexual misconduct and harassment, that kind of a thing. And in that work, I work with respondents and complainants, so people who are accused of perpetrating violence, and people who are impacted by violence in different ways. I find a lot of fulfillment in doing that work and being a part of that. Connected to Alexandra as the director of that office, and being a confidential resource that, I mean, really, I am fully in my chaplain role. I'm on the scheduler there, but I'm fully staff of here at the chaplaincy. And yet I've met a lot of people I've come to have a pastoral care relationship with to support them in their growth, their development, their change, how they grow from trauma, how they grow to hold themselves accountable or be held accountable by their community. I mean, it's very, very challenging work. And yet it is also, I think, it feels like a very natural outgrowth of my work in the chaplaincy, and a very important one. And so I would say that I think, while I'm passionate about that and I have training and experience in that particular area, I think a lot of our staff and a lot of our, there are lots of places on campus that we can kind of show up and find a lot of need, so to speak, or a lot of value, at least, in people building relationships with chaplains. I think another area for this in general is like recovery work. Like, I think people on that journey of recovery for many, many years, especially with both AA and Smart Recovery and a lot of these other programs, there's often been a spiritual component, in some cases a very Christian component, to that recovery. There have also been, alternatives to different types of recovery that allow people to, again, go on that journey in community, go on that journey with spiritual care providers, with chaplains and ministers. And I can imagine a world where that kind of where that's a area. And we began conversations about this with the Haven, which is the new big recovery program on campus. And I was a little involved in the Haven, the working group that we were beginning to have the Haven on campus. And but I think that it's not just there, but I think there are places that we can show up and we can bring what we offer, and we can even be sort of normalized as like, we really have a resource on campus who is a chaplain. You may not know much about what a chaplain is, but for this particular need is really valuable, and that we can meet really brand new types of relationships and needs by doing that. And I bet there are ways I can't even think of that we could be doing that. And part of it just comes from, we have a pretty diverse team, but especially in terms of experiences and what gifts people bring. And I think, like, when I was hired, I had already been a rape crisis counselor with the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center, on their volunteer team for a couple of years before I was hired here. And I mean, that's been a part of my sort of, so to speak, counseling training, like how I am a presence, how I'm a care provider. But it wasn't a part of, I mean, that was that was like a piece of what I think I brought to campus, but I don't think that it wasn't sort of like a necessary thing it's not like a requirement or anything. And we have lots of our staff have a lot of gifts and a lot of experiences and a lot of terrific training in different areas, that we bring, that it really might even be like, even though we're often tradition specific chaplains, might even seem sort of like completely transcend like just being a chaplain for one tradition. And so I think that as we continue to lean into those gifts that we all have, we'll find brand new ways to be a part of campus and to meet people where they are, that we maybe just haven't imagined yet. So that's what I'm excited about.
That sounds amazing. And it's really cool that you were part of the sort of formation of the Haven. I remember that was, that was instituted my freshman year, 2018, if I was, or like that was when I feel like I remember the email announcement coming out about the Haven. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what has been your most memorable moment working as a chaplain here at Tufts?
In all my years, my most memorable moment, I'm not going to be able to, let me think for a moment. I think I'm gonna take the question a little differently. I'm gonna restrict it to this year. Is that okay? Just to keep it manageable for myself. I think so. In the fall, and this was before the restrictions changed for between about November and just recently, right? We were doing these kind of socially distanced hikes with the Humanist community, and I was kind of taking some leadership there to gather people together and to make sure we were being safe and everything. And yet it's pretty wild, because we had done a retreat where we had gone on a big hike in the fells in Medford last year, or the year before this year, when, before COVID. And it felt like so much to pull together. It felt like so much to do. It felt like so much. And the really goal was just like to be outside, be with nature, feel that sense of something greater. And we did it once. It was really nice. People really liked it. I think it was kind of a long hike that one time we did it. But anyway, in the fall, we were able to do it like almost every weekend. We were doing a hike like that. And I think as we, it was a few things, a few pieces of that were so inspired that I just loved about it. One was that there were a lot of new students who I'd never met before, who were new to our campus, who were able to kind of have that informal connection that I think we've been really craving this last year, of just like, you're doing something for like 3 or 4 hours, you're going to come in and out of talking to other people, you know, you're hiking with different people as you do it, that kind of a thing. I really, it's just, that felt like such a gift to be able to offer a space for, you know, safely in the times right now. We went to a lot of different parts of the fells are a huge, big, like, I mean, they're just it's incredible, like what we have access to. And really, honestly, like when I was a student here, I don't think we went one time and I didn't have any idea how big and expansive they were. It's like, and we can walk there. Like, I mean, the concern was like, how do we do like a thing like that if we have to travel? And it's like, we can walk there in 40 minutes from campus. And so, and you know, we went to a couple of the moments that were just so meaningful, was just those like times when people are coming together in a safe way on like a hill where you can see the highway, or you could see a lot more of the world. And I mean, really, it was in particular, you know, it was like, it was doing it so frequently, we were just seeing the leaves change. We were seeing nature change in a way that I like. I mean, I grew up in North Carolina, and there was a little more kind of foliage, it wasn't quite as urban as I live now. And it was just like, I have a lot of memories of that change happening and watching the change happen. It was like one of the first times I've really felt that, just by like planning actively to be outside and be in nature so fully, so regularly. And so it's kind of just like a series of moments, but I think that's been just one of the most memorable things that I'm really excited, and I'm really hopeful we'll be able to do something like that again before this year's out, a little more as we are changing restrictions and everything. And then, yeah, just also just being with people, even distant, even safe, even with masks, like just being with one another, in community with one another. But in particular, being reminded of the fact that we are not just in community with other people, we're in community with all of our ecosystem. It's a whole ecosystem that we are a part of also, that impacts us and we impact it. And I think that's, so that whole kind of, those like however many we did, maybe 7 or 8 times that we went on those hikes through the fall, which is a really wonderful experience. So if I restrict it to this year, that's my answer, I guess.
It's, yeah, I remember seeing some of the photos that you had posted on Facebook, and I was just like, that's such a great idea. I wish that our community was a little bit more into nature and activity like that. So maybe we'll try it out when it's COVID safe and folks are ready to do that. Because I think that we too, like, we're feeling kind of like this void of like, oh man, like we can't be in the IFC for Joma, like we can't do these things that we used to do before.
Yeah.
And I think that as much as we put effort into Zoom, like at the end of the day, people, you know, they still felt that sort of like that void. So hopefully some inspiration for us as well. So for the sake of time, I'm going to ask my last 2 questions together.
Okay, great.
So firstly, if you could tell us what's a fun fact about you. And then secondly, what is your favorite ice cream flavor?
Amazing. Okay. Fun fact, some people watching this may probably already know this because I do talk about it a lot. Where I grew up in North Carolina is the native location of the Venus flytrap. And so I didn't like, it's not like I was like growing up in like, I think you might imagine like a jungle and it's like I'm fighting off fly traps or something, like giant fly. It's not quite like that, but there are native plant gardens of Venus flytraps where I grew up. And I got especially just like obsessed almost with this. I mean, it's just such a neat kind of plant, I think, in my opinion at least. It's such a cool thing. It's like, how did this even come to be? So I've started raising them. I have maybe right now I probably have like 12 or 13 different carnivorous plants, so Venus flytraps and a couple other types of carnivorous plants at home. They're all dormant right now because they go dormant in the winter. But I keep them and I have them all over our house and I water them and stuff. And I've brought them into to like the IFC a couple of times and stuff. Maybe we should bring more in. But fun fact is that I raise carnivorous plants and I'm always excited to talk about carnivorous plants. And the thing about carnivorous plants, I know we're a time boundary, but it's just, I think they're so cute. I just think they're adorable. Like they're very cute. Like when you are feeding a Venus flytrap, because you can feed it, like you don't have to feed it live, like you could just feed it like fish food or something. And when you're feeding it, if you're feeding it something that's not alive, you have to like pet it to make it think that to kind of like trigger the chemical processes, which is so cute. Just like a little adorable fly try, just petting it until it like seals and does the digestive process. So anyway, if anyone ever wants to talk about carnivorous plants, I'm excited to do that. And my favorite ice cream flavor is it is mint chocolate chip for sure. I like that. I like flavors that are like that there is like a visual component to what we think of as a flavor. It's like I know that's mint chocolate chip. You know, it's like so that's my favorite ice cream flavor. What is your favorite ice cream flavor, or if you don't eat ice cream, similar cold flavor?
I'm kind of basic. I guess it's like a basic kids flavor that a lot of kids like. I really like cookie. It's called cookies and cream, or like basically like any type of Oreo ice cream, coffee, like whatever type of combination. I'm down for it. That's always what I go for. And some toppings here and there.
Terrific. Awesome.
Well, thank you so much, Walker, for talking to me. It was lovely having this conversation.
Always
And
a pleasure.
we look forward to continuously seeing the amazing work that you do here at the Tufts University Chaplaincy. Thank you.